It's America's month, and just about time for the election. We're going to have a new president, or perhaps the same one, if Joe can get his act together. However, we have to ask ourselves if all of this really matters. Some people's lives change more than others, but most of us, it's going to be about the same. Most of Americans think their lives change depending on which president's elected, but that's more or less the programming they've been taught, their pledge allegiance to the flag, and their belief that whoever is elected as president actually matters. And that's what we're going to cover today. Whether it does, and you can make your own assessment, I'm just going to kind of give you some background and some facts about what's actually going on behind the scenes. Dude. No, I'm not just talking about checks and balances the way our American founders intended. There have been amendments and interpretations of the law that you may have never heard of. We're going to cover a few of those today. The first one being lobbying. Lobbying. Lobbying literally translates to the attempt to persuade a government official into doing some action. See, what lobbying is in today's world is rich people using that power, the money, the stored energy they have up, and deploying it to persuade what they want to happen in the government. The best part is you can't blame the politicians. You can't blame the founding fathers. You have to blame the interpretation of the First Amendment. Nowhere in the First Amendment, no matter what anyone tells you, does it say that we should allow lobbyists. They might allude to freedom of speech, but how does that translate to, yes, you have the freedom to give money to decide what you want to have happen in the government. So what you have here in terms of lobbying is merely an interpretation of the First Amendment, so that it is our natural right to be able to pay people to have what policy we want in place. And even that judgment was, made by a politician who may or may not have been persuaded to make that decision. Okay, so now you know how people get elected. Now we want to go into how the money supply got the way it is. And with that, we need to go to the Federal Reserve. Now you might have heard of the gold standard. The gold standard. Nobody uses it anymore, but you might have heard of it. So what used to happen is when the United States government wanted to print money, the gold standard would say they would have to have a certain amount of gold in their reserves to print that dollar. So you had an even distribution. You knew exactly what your money was worth. But what happened is they took us off the gold standard, meaning that the United States government could print money whenever they chose. Whenever the Federal Reserve, not the government, whenever the Federal Reserve wanted to print money, they could print it. So what you had happen was the lobbyists said, hey, we want money to come to us. So the lobbyists persuaded the people in power, Federal Reserve, to print the money that they wanted them to print. And this decision of the gold standard, of us getting off the gold standard, no doubt had some influence by lobbyists. So now you have a society where the rich people are telling you what you want to do with your money supply. And how do the rich people think? Well, let's go over here to the last part. Who really runs the world? Without a shadow of doubt, businesses. So now you know how lobbyists control who's in power, and you know how the Federal Reserve can control the money supply and how much is printed, how much is in circulation, and you know that the lobbyists are controlling the people that are determining how much money is printed. Then we can look at, okay, who has the money and how did they get it? Well, you see, my friend, when money is printed, it's slowly decreasing the value of each dollar. But what's happened here is as you're printing more and more money, assets become more valuable. So take this business building, say it was worth $100,000, okay? And then you say, hey, here's Johnny. Johnny's got 20K. Johnny's got 20K savings, been working 40 years, working hard, working as much as he can, and he's saved up. He's loved his family. He's been an honorable man. Saved up 20K in 40 years of work. And now you have this guy who owns this $100,000 building. So what happens here when the gold supply matches the money? They can't print anymore, so assets more or less stay the same. But when you've printed and manufactured $2 more here and tripled the money supply, now this asset becomes worth 300K because there's more money in supply. And the savings of good old Johnny, we'll give Johnny a name here. Good old Johnny, let's draw him out. Johnny's got 20K in savings. What happens is he left that in cash. He didn't invest it into an asset that would appreciate over time. He left it in the cash. What is Johnny's cash savings worth? Isn't that interesting? Still worth 20K. So now you can see how, let's say you couldn't move that 20K. You needed to save it, and you saved it for 5, 10, 20, 40 years. Now this asset's appreciating, and imagine what we do here. What happens here? If we add in some more money and they keep printing, what happens here? 600K? What's Johnny at? Oh, Johnny had to pay his bills. Johnny's got to pay property tax because he has a mortgage. He's got to pay it. 18K, had to take some out of his savings. So what's happened here is after this has been printed, this business, this asset's now worth 600K. And this, my friend, has decreased. Interesting, right? So then your obvious last question is, okay, that's great. Who runs the world then? Well, my friend, if you have a money supply that's helping the rich get richer, you have assets that are helping the rich get richer because of the money supply, and you have whoever has the most money determining who's in office. Well, this, my friend, is where you're going to have to do your own research. See, this is all I got. You got to do it from here. You got to take it from here. But I've given you some pretty good clues to how you should operate with your money and, quite exactly who could possibly be running the world today. So in closing, the president may have some power. They might be able to pass a bill. Might I ask you one question? Who did they have to take the money from to get to the power? Who did they have to appease now in office who gave them the money, who's also giving them money when they're up for re-election? And I can guarantee you one thing. It is not Johnny. And that, my friends, is why the election doesn't really matter this November, or for any November for that matter. So, vote if you want, vote if you don't want to. Don't really think it matters. And, well, that's even, judging if they actually count the votes right.